So I just did a 30-minute video talking about First Nations, Cree, Ojibwe, languages indigenous to Canada. And you can see in that video how much I care about the topic. In the past, I decided to devote the rest of my life to it. And then I decided I had to find something else to do with the rest of my life because there was no way for me to move forward with it in Canadian academia. So in our own chit-chat, this brought up the question of how do you find options for graduate school, MA, PhD. A lot of this would be true even of a BA. How do you find these career paths? What would you do with it after you got the diploma? And you were basically asking, what would I do today if I wanted to get back into First Nations languages and studies and what have you? I want to say first, before we get into any technical details, I think it's really profoundly problematic that today this is really put entirely on the shoulders of the student. And I have white privilege. Like, I have a huge advantage over other students in doing this. I can put on a suit and tie and walk into any university in the world and make an appointment to talk to a professor and be taken seriously. My voice, right now, the voice you're hearing, think about how much harder that is to do if you're a Pakistani immigrant. You speak with an accent. Think about how much harder it is to do if you're born Cree or Ojibwe or, you have other disadvantages. My manner of speaking. And it's funny, anyway, in the past when I was involved with Buddhist studies, people talked about me as if it was at some disadvantage because I was too abrasive or too forthright as opposed to walking on eggshells. And I would say back to people, no, I have huge advantages. And I'd been all over the world. I'd visited universities all over the world, in Asia, in Europe, in North America. And I'm treated with a lot of respect, partly on the basis of my research, partly on the basis of my experience background, but partly it's just the swag. Like, you know what I mean? That's it. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can walk in, and even if the secretary treats you like crap, say, hey, excuse me, I'm here to make an appointment. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, you're used to being in an institutional context and hustling. Not everyone can do that. But I have decades of experience at this point. But I think in the past, decades ago, professors understood it was really part of their job, whether or not they formally had the title of graduate advisor, to really advise their students about what their options were for MAs, for PhDs, for other things, and for the professor to be the conduit of information, for the professor to talk to the other universities and say, well, look, I've got a kid here, I've got a candidate who wants to do this or that kind of research, or has this or that kind of background or interest. And today, it's really left up to the student alone with Google, the student alone with email, the student alone with Wikipedia to look around and find these things. I found that even when I went in and talked to graduate student advisors or student advisors, the different people whose job it was to help. And again, I have a huge advantage. I really have befriended a huge number of professors. When I was at University of Victoria, the professors weren't just providing me advice like any other student. They were really taking time and thinking about it. It was still completely useless. I mean, it still came up with absolutely zero viable options. The only recommendation I got from my professors at University of Victoria was to join the CIA. That is, again and again, they told me to join the CIA, and that was about it. I felt like, you ever feel like you're living in a bad sitcom? You know what I mean? It's like you're going around talking to these people, and it's like, have you considered joining the CIA? It's like, is it my hair? Is that like, So, yeah, and I believe me, I'm not insulted. I mean, they're not telling me to go work at McDonald's or something, but, Anyway, weird. I never got a single positive result of that. But, yeah, it now falls on the student's shoulders to go around and look at these things.
That's been my experience with the program that I've looked into as well. And most of them just give you an email response like, these are the requirements. This is what, here's our informational session schedule. Please show up at the next informational session and you'll get all the information you need. I did that for nursing. I did that for dental hygiene. I did that for speech pathology. I did that for counseling. I did that for...
And did you do face-to-face conversations with your own professors at your undergraduate university or no? Did you go in and talk to them?
Not my undergraduate.
Okay.
No, because
because you weren't specialized enough? Okay.
Yeah, the university that I went to didn't have any of those programs, just like specifically those programs.
Oh, okay, for that reason. Okay.
Yeah,
because they didn't have expertise in the areas you were interested in. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. Because I was going to say, I mean, a lot of students don't feel comfortable sitting down and talking to a professor that way.
Yeah.
And on both sides, you do have to build up the comfort on both sides. You have to make the professor comfortable too. You can't just walk in as a complete stranger and
At those informational sessions, they were like, well, if you have any questions at the end, you can ask me.
Yeah.
And so I would stay after and ask whatever questions I had.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it was like you need to talk to you need to talk to the university about the actual requirements for getting into this program. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah.
They could offer general advice.
But I mean, the advice I'm normally looking for is this program good? Mm-hmm. And if so, what is it good at? Right. And what, it's more nuanced information I'm looking for. I'm looking for off-the-record recommendations and warnings and that kind of thing. Yeah, but I can tell you in Canada, the professors don't see that as their role. They're not prepared to give that advice, and they're generally, really bad at it, So we're talking about Cree and First Nations, but I mean, like the kind of information you need, and professors here in China really have it. I kind of feel like I should have put this at the start of the video, but one of the things that really struck me when I dealt with professors in China, in the Chinese-speaking world, so that's including Hong Kong and Taiwan, but obviously China, the level of guanxi, the level of
making connections with people.
Right. Okay, so like to give an example, if I talk to one professor in Taiwan and one professor in China, so if I talk to a professor of anthropology in Taiwan, they know of every other professor in the discipline. Now, why do I say they know of them? They know who they are, they know what their area of expertise is, what kind of research they do, what kind of research they don't do. They have that kind of knowledge of them. They may not know them personally, like they can call in a favor, but they have met them and they're in contact. So when I talked to one professor in Taiwan, it was as effective as talking to like 30 professors in Canada. You'd really be getting useful information. And here in China, I have less experience, but similarly, both professors in anthropology and professors in Buddhism, they would know what the options were. So if you were a student in that situation, you could talk to one professor and they'd be able to say to you, okay, well, this is the kind of work you want to do. These are your strengths and weaknesses. This is what you need to know. This is what, they'd have that. And in Canada, it's the opposite extreme. When you talk to one professor in Canada, you're talking to one cul-de-sac, one dead end, and nothing. They have no access to any of those. They don't know anything else. They don't even know the other professors in their own department or in their own university. And I don't think I've mentioned this on YouTube before, but one of my professors at University of Victoria, and I have respect for him, and he also has respect for me. After he'd maybe read two papers that I'd submitted to him, and so he knew me, he'd seen my resume, and he respected my work a lot. He respected my intelligence. He respected the papers I'd given him. I said to him, well, look, I'm out here trying to find a master's degree program. So, do you want to supervise me? I could do it here, here at University of Victoria. I could just progress on to doing a master's degree program. And this was his answer. He sat there and he said, every single graduate student I've had, I track their progress after they finish this diploma. Not a single one has gone on to full-time employment, of any kind, of any kind. And that's, this is the thing. You've got to ask the right questions. When you're out there seeking advice from professors, you've got to ask their questions. You've also got to be willing to really hear their answer when they're giving it to you. Like, I took that with all due gravity. Right. And a lot of people, especially if you're a younger person, maybe you're 21 years old or something.
I'll be the exception.
Well, no, but a lot of people will be like, oh, no, it'll be fine. Oh, it's wonderful. Or they'll just, reiterate vague platitudes about how wonderful the university is or the value of education, how wonderful something is in general. And it's like, no, this dude is being as honest with you as he can be, right? Like, he's not telling you this is a bad program, my life is a lie. It's coming close, right? But, he's coming as close as he can to really telling you, don't enroll here. It's a bad idea. And, so I took that seriously. Now, that same professor, he probably would be happy to supervise me. But, there's probably a lot. That's what he can tell me. There are probably other things he can't tell me. So, again, you've already heard this example, but, University of Minnesota, when I was asking around there about First Nations, I have another good example, too, at Algoma University. But, these are different universities that have First Nation programs. One of the main things I was trying to ascertain when I got in touch with them was, look, do you guys really teach this language? Really, really? Like, it's very easy to put a language on the on the list of courses. Say you've got in the program, what really is the situation? And University of Minnesota, I talked to one of the older members of faculty, and after he talked to me for a little bit, he said, look, the opportunity here at University of Minnesota really was a few decades ago. Today we don't do this thing anymore. That is gold. That's exactly the kind of information you're mining for. Right. You have to know who to ask, you have to know the right questions to ask, and then you have to be able to take the answer when they give it to you. Don't say back, oh, no, University of Minnesota has a great reputation in this area of studies. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Take my $40,000. No. you got to hear that, even if it's subtle. You got to know when to shut up and feel with the full gravity that they may be hinting at or telling you in an understated way. Because if they tell you the truth in an email, you can screenshot the email and send it to their boss or something. You know what I mean? Like if they say to you, this department is a fucking disaster, which it may be, whatever, or they say, hey, look, actually the guy who took over that program is a religious maniac with a degree from Brigham Young University. You don't know, right? Like, what are the issues? What's being unspoken there or something, right? And with Algoma University, it was deep into email correspondence. And I remember they wrote back to me eventually and just said, and I talked to several different people, several different professors, and they said, look, what you're seeking in terms of being able to just take courses in Cree, sorry, in that case it's Ojibwe, take courses in Ojibwe and learn the Ojibwe language, Anishinaabe, we want to be able to offer that. We hope to be able to offer that in the next few years, but right now we really can't. We really don't. We're not delivering it. That's it. Like say no more. So yeah, you get different prices from different people. I'm in a really weird position in terms of the two areas I might have options in, or that I might be tempted to still go back and get a PhD in. I mean, I know what I'm missing. I've spent so many years asking those questions and going to visit campuses and meeting with professors. And again, asking for those indirect endorsements. Maybe someone at the University of British Columbia can't be honest with you about what's good and bad about their department, but somebody at an adjacent university, somebody next door, you know what I mean, can say, well, look, it's not so great, or no, they don't really do, what you want to do or something, whatever the problem is. And sometimes you have to make these judgments just on the basis of absence of praise. You know what I mean? Where it's like, well, look, this is a political science department, or this is a Buddhist studies department or Asian studies department, and nobody's ever told me anything good about it. And that can be very significant, especially if you directly ask a professor to endorse it or not. If you say, is this good or not? Simply if they don't say anything positive about it, you've got to learn to take that seriously. Because they're not in a position to say to you, well, the problem is, old man McCloskey or something, he's nuts and he's tearing the department apart. They probably can't tell you the inside gossip. Although plenty of the time I get the inside gossip too.
When you were looking into University of Victoria for learning Chinese, did you know about the issues? Because we had talked about it recently, that they condensed a whole year into one semester.
So with Chinese, they took a year. Well, okay, so I guess they doubled it twice. They took the amount of time, they cut it in half and cut it in half again. Yeah. And then with Japanese, they cut it in half again. So it was a doubling process. But the Japanese was even worse than the Chinese. It was ridiculous what they did. Right. So
you had to learn like an impossible amount of vocabulary.
Right. And I put together a formal presentation about that to the ombudsman. I took that to the dean and the ombudsman and said, look, this is the number of new words you're expected to memorize in a week in Chinese in this course. Because this used to be over 3 months. And now it's 1 week or something. The compression's so ridiculous.
They weren't honest with you about when you were looking into the program.
So I answer your initial question. So how did I do it? Yeah. Ultimately, the question about whether or not UVic was a good bet came down to email with one professor, and that was the senior professor teaching the Chinese language courses. Okay. And she reassured me. She said, no, we have a good program, and this is how it works, and this is the layout, and so on. And what she told me, I mean, she really only knew about the course she taught herself. However, I talked to an official advisor, someone whose full-time job is just being a new student advisor. Yeah. And everything that person told me was a lie, was false. Yeah, I don't know to what extent that was intentional or incompetence. A mix of the two, or 100% incompetence, but that was weird. Every single thing that person told me was false.
Yeah, that sucks. And then when I learned the hard way.
Well, and then when I got there, but those questions, so that woman wasn't specifically for the Asian Studies department, but a lot of it really impacted my life. Because it was like, okay, so because it was like I already have one bachelor's degree. If I transfer the credits, does that mean I can do this concurrently? They were technical questions. And I assumed I would go there and I would just take Chinese courses and have a part-time job. And when I got there, it was like, no, that's not possible. You have to be a full-time student with a really intense, it was way more intense than a normal undergraduate study load. You have to do a study load where you're doing all 400 level courses all the time, and it is just too much work. Mm-hmm. The workload, you need a mix of 400 level and 100 level courses just in terms of the amount of reading and writing involved. And, I did handle it because I was 36 years old or something. I was very disciplined. Right. And I had no distractions. I remember I got a big laugh out of one of my professors. I said, look, I can cope with this. I don't even have a girlfriend. Some students have one girlfriend. Some students have two girlfriends. But like you've got to set up the workload in a way that you can manage it. But when I was explaining to them the amount of time and what have you. But yeah, however, the short answer is University of Victoria, that decision ultimately was based on limited information on the website, talking to this one advisor who told me nothing but falsehoods, whether intentional or unintentional. I still have no idea. And then directly talking with the senior professor of Chinese who taught Chinese herself. Yeah, that was what I could do.
So you know firsthand, even when you go through all of the routes that you've discussed, you can still get...
It can still be a disaster in many ways. That's right. Yeah, that's true.
Sucks.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And I think I've mentioned to you the example of one of the universities that had a program in Thai. This is Thai, the Thai language. And when I got the guy on the phone, that wasn't email. We had email first. And I just asked simple questions like, well, I've looked at the faculty list for the department. Who is teaching Thai? He refused to answer the question. I didn't just ask, like maybe 3 times. So sorry, because then he said something irrelevant back. I said, I'm sorry, I'm asking you, who is the professor who teaches the Thai language classes? And he was so obfuscatory and evasive. I said, look, I've looked at, because, with any list of faculty, a department like that doesn't have that many. It's not like they have 20 people in the Department of Southeast Asian Studies. There are only so many. It's very clear, okay, this person does Indonesia, and this person does Malaysia, and this is the one person who does Thailand. I was like, well, and, I was asking probably, and I think I said to him, well, do you teach it yourself? Like, or is this another professor or what? And his refusal was so strange to me. I interpreted the time as meaning they don't really teach the Thai language at all. But I was wrong. His wife teaches the Thai language. I later found out from another professor when I reported this. He said, "Oh, he's embarrassed because it's his wife." And I assume his wife doesn't have a PhD or isn't fully qualified. I assume that was which is very often the case in Western universities. Being married to someone qualifies you. I was offered a position with only a bachelor's degree teaching at the university where my wife was a professor just because I was married to her. So there's a lot of corruption of that kind in Western, definitely in Canada and in the United Kingdom, and I don't know. I can't talk about the United States, but definitely Canada, and the United Kingdom. That's part of our proud Anglican tradition, I guess, of English-speaking academia. So, look, so it's completely hopeless. That's the.
So how can you get involved with First Nations? What can you do?
I mean, First Nations is a really strange situation because it's not cash poor. There's a lot of money in the game. There's infinite research funding. There's infinite project funding. I was going to say program, and then that's what happened there. I was going to say infinite program funding, infinite project funding. There's so much money for anyone with a legitimate project to stand up and get it. And there's a lot of government support now to compensate for decades of neglect. What there is a crucial lack of talent. There's a crucial lack of people to teach you or work with or foster you or answer the phone call or answer the email. So, how do you get ahead? For me, the fundamental logjam is I don't think I would have any legitimacy in First Nations if I don't become fluent in a First Nations language. To me, that's very fundamental because otherwise I'm just some white guy. So, and there are people who would say, oh well, like my first diploma is political science. So why don't you just get a degree in political science about helping First Nations? To me, no, it's not acceptable. Same way, if you want to be involved in politics of China, you've got to learn the Chinese language. If you want to be involved with the politics of the Cree or the Ojibwe, you got to learn a language like Cree or Ojibwe. Your choice. Or if you want to do Mohawk or Inuit, your choice. But to me, that's a very serious barrier to entry. But the situation, program by program, department by department, can totally change in 5 years. The department I was just at University of Victoria is currently in receivership, which means the professors within the department refuse to get along so much they can't appoint who's in charge. They tried to appoint someone external in charge, and that failed. So, like, the department is falling apart. CSNUS is a disaster, right? And you may not know it, but as a student, that does impact you if a department is a disaster. This is not secret information, so I can say this on the internet, that the department has fallen apart this way. The last time I asked, because I was writing to the department, I said, oh, so who's the current chair? Who's the current head of the department? And I got a message back explaining, well, there is no chair currently because the department is falling apart. You know, one professor can totally define and dominate a department, especially in a specific language or specific discipline, whether that's Cree or Ojibwe or Thai or Chinese or anything else. Most of these fields, unless you're talking about a huge department, unless you happen to be at a university where, you know, their department of biology is 300 professors or something. But most of the time, this comes into to a small number of people. And, you know, to make that decision today, all of it is on the student's shoulders. You got to go there, write the emails, make the phone calls. You have to somehow get in touch with the professors, ask the right questions, and then be willing to hear it when they give you those answers. As of this moment, okay, so this is the other point. You know, professors who I knew well, I have sometimes asked them, do you know one good option under this heading? So the First Nations is a really powerful example of that, because there is a very small university, and it's right by the border between the United States and Canada. So I forget, I think it's in Minnesota, but it's in one of those Great Lakes states. So there was this small university, a small college that's strongly tied to local First Nations people, basically Ojibwe and some other people there. And I discovered that this university exists just because of they have a publication, they have a magazine. And at that time, I was going through everything that had ever been published in or about Cree and Ojibwe.
This isn't the same area?
Nope, different place. No, this is in the States. It's on the American side of the border. So I found this small college, and I remember I emailed some people. I had a Ojibwe discussion group. I emailed about it. I said, oh, you know, there's this Ojibwe publication from this small town, from this small college. And I got emails back. You know, I mean, everyone's a snob. It's okay. But I got emails back saying, like, how could you not know about this college? They're, like, one of the most important places for the Ojibwe language and so on. And I wrote back and I said, look, I'm going to tell you something. I talked face-to-face and by email and by phone with every single major professor in this field. And I asked them, do you know one good option for studying Ojibwe? And none of them mentioned this college. None of them. I brainstormed with you the list. So if you are telling me this is a great college or a good college or even an adequate college to study Ojibwe at, I have a really serious counterfactual claim here. I have reasons to be skeptical. Because when I asked the professors who are in that field, who are lifetime specialists, not one of them said, oh yeah, I know a good place for you to go and learn Ojibwe, right? Now, you could say that about Cree and other situations, but in Asian studies, that cuts even deeper, because theoretically there are so many institutions in Asian studies. And when I was asking professors, well, do you know even one good place? And sometimes the conversation is, do you know one good place for an MA and PhD within Canada? But sometimes it was global. Or sometimes it was specifically like, look, do you know one good place in Japan? But I mean, these were really broad questions. And where I'm face-to-face with the president, the professor sits there for a while and thinks about it. And there is either no answer, or they say something after thinking about it for a while, like, did you ever apply to join the CIA? Seriously. One professor I remember, he said, have you considered going to business school, getting a degree, a business management degree? You got to take the significance of that. You know what I mean? It's so easy for people to bullshit you or bullshit themselves. You should be like, oh, I'm sure there are lots of great options. I'm not sure, and there are not lots of great options. And I'm someone who's now been doing this kind of low-level research for like 15 years continuously. I don't want to count the number of years of talking to professors in these different fields. And sometimes you get a really clear answer, like the door is closed against you, or the door is open and they say, you're welcome, come on in. But a lot of the time what you get are mixed signals, where it's like, well, you can get an MA here, you can get a PhD here, but, and that's where you really need to try to get other sources of intelligence, It's tough. And today I think 100% of the burden is on the students. I think the professors I was asking that, I don't think they're used to being asked that question. They don't see that as part of their role. They don't see their role as finding and creating opportunities for students. So, and it is normally, if you read their job description, especially the professor that has graduate advisor in their job title, it really is. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, we're looking now at such a crazy variety of options, including going to a practical college and getting degrees as bakers, learning how to bake bread, learning how to bake a cake. And the thing is, for me, that still doesn't preclude the possibility of getting a PhD. Because for me, if in the next 10 years, I can work as a baker, can work as a caterer, can work in a kitchen, and I can easily get a PhD in my spare time. But I need an institution to help me do it. Yeah. Anything else? That's a wrap.